This chat is about the expulsion of the Jews from England, which is really the logical conclusion of the belief systems that were building up in England at the time. They thought that Jews were killing their children to make matzah and torturing the host, the transubstantiated host, to inflict further punishment on Jesus. They were increasingly embittered towards this and suspicious and didn't want this people group among them. And I want to say that I want to talk about relevance for a minute, because I think that, this all happened 1,000 years ago. Who cares? And I think that it matters, and here's why. Because it paints a picture for us about what we believe. If you hold a belief system, then you have to realize that if you really believe it, it's going to affect your actions. And so if you hold someone in contempt, then you will treat them contemptuously. You will treat them as an enemy. And that's exactly what plays out. And if you think that they're killing children and doing these, that they are of the devil, that they killed the Messiah, if you believe all of those things, then you will, of course, you will treat these people badly. And, the Crusades had happened, and they were killing people, not in England, on this issue. They killed them on their way through, but English noblemen, as they passed through France and Germany, absolutely would have participated in the violence that was happening there against the Jews, and certainly, of course, when they got to Israel. So the relevance is that what we believe drives how we act. And so that's why I think it's important to see anti-Semitism in the context of the bigger picture, because in every generation there is something that besets these people. There's some new misfortune, some new horror that happens, and it's always justified. That Christianity brings a path that you can always take the moral high ground for treating these people poorly. And in today's world, you look back and you go, I wouldn't have done that. And the question is, well, but here you are in your generation, and you have the ability to stand back from the justifications being used to do the same types of things to the same people. And so it's tempting to join in with pop culture, and my hope is that by shining light on what we've done in the past, it will cause everyone to say, wait, maybe there's more going on with this people group than just whatever the popular narrative is in my era. So anyway, it's England in the 1200s, and a man comes to the throne. His name's Henry III. And Henry III, he comes in as a really young, when his father dies and he ascends the throne, he's really young, but eventually he comes into his own, and he's really bent on trying to get back the land that his father lost to France, land in France that had belonged to England and that France had won back. And so he had some expensive wars in the 1200s, and he needed money. And so at the time, Jewish people were like royal serfs. They were able to exist in a kingdom at the benevolence of the king. And what that means is that they had protection from the king, and they served at the king's behest, and they could move about and exist in the kingdom only if the king said so. And they needed to provide an important service to the king. And the service that the Jews provided in these kingdoms at this time frame was often one of the services that had a lot of value was the financial matters, because Christians believed that it was a sin for one Christian to charge another Christian interest. So usury was a sin, and so they left financing things to the Jewish community. And so how that was done at the time is if a nobleman needed money, he could take his land as collateral, and the Jewish community would create a bond, and that bond would represent that collateral, and they would lend money to the nobleman. And so that worked out fine, and the Jews hardly ever, never really foreclosed on the English nobility. They just didn't. And so what happens is in the 1240s, King Henry needs money for his wars. He's broke, and he's taxing everybody, and he taxes the Jews particularly heavily. And they have to raise some cash. So they take these bonds that they hold that are tied to the land of the indebted English nobility, and the nobility that wasn't in debt buys the bonds at cut rates. The Jews are able to pay their debts. Well, the Englishmen were quick to foreclose on their English nobleman neighbors, especially the Queen's wife. Queen Eleanor was actually very aggressive with her buying and foreclosing. And so that caused a lot of resentment, but the resentment was towards the Jews. They blamed the Jews. And, there wasn't a lot of sophistication, a lot of understanding about interest rates and collateral and all of that in this era. And so the Jews got blamed once again. So the animosity and the tension against them with most people in England at that time just continued to increase. And so anyway, so fast forward, Edward comes to the throne, and he needs money. And a lot of scholars believe that what happens is he calls the nobleman in, and he basically makes a deal. And so it's basically they become a scapegoat. They become a politically convenient way for him to get what he wants. And he expels, in 1290, he expels all the Jews from England. And the way that was done was he said that you've got X amount of time to leave the country. You can take whatever wealth you can carry, but your lands and all of your bonds, your debts, will go to the crown. So the crown will receive all of that when you go. So you couldn't take any of it with you. And he gave them protection to the border. But a lot, like once you got on the high seas, once you tried to cross the channel, he did not offer protection. And so many people were attacked by pirates. It was a bad time of year for crossing the channel. There's a lot of weather issues. The Edict of Expulsion, this is interesting, and we'll probably do a whole chat on this, but there's this thing called Tisha B'Av. And Tisha B'Av was the day in the Jewish calendar when when Jerusalem fell and the temple fell in 70 AD. And it has since then been a day throughout history when tragic, horrific things happen to the Jewish people. And this was Tisha B'Av of 50/50 in the Jewish calendar, when they were basically kicked out of England. So that's the story of them being kicked out. And if you think about going back to relevance, if you think about the thought process which kings had expressed previous to 500 years before, that the Jews they're polluting our land. In other words, they don't even need to be on the same geographic location as us. Well, the logical conclusion of that is that we're going to kick them out, and that solves the problem. And I would just tie that to Hitler was still trying to solve the problem, because the Jewish people, it was societal for millennium that they are a problem, and Christianity fermented that into culture. And so that's still, is there any place on earth where they're not a problem? So that I would contend that there's more going on here than whatever the narrative is. There's a bigger picture. So, thanks.